Welcome, everybody, to the Hot Takes Happy Hour. I'm Elise Labott with Cosmopolitics, and I have my
Um,
ride or die, Danny Pletka from What the Hell is Going On. Welcome back.
Welcome back, everybody. My glasses are still reflecting. Sorry, Veronique.
But
I'm
we
still
do
not.
have better Wi Fi this time.
We do, and I'm still not drinking. I'm drinking water because I've still got this heinous spring flu thingy that went around back to back. So I'm being really careful. But please do try the really nice cocktail recipe that I sent around earlier today when I sent the time change. I make it for Stephen. I don't actually drink bourbon, so it's a little
I
bit of a
like a
lie.
bourbon. I like a
I
bourbon.
It's really good. I have a sip of it, but it's really nice and sort of warm. And if you have a smoker, and I put a link to the Amazon smoker that I bought, it really works. It works well. It makes you feel like one of those very hipster bartender types in New York who's all handsome and interesting. So
Mmm,
hey,
me
try it. Let
likey
us know
that.
whether you like it or not. What are we talking about, Elise?
Well, I think we have to talk about the President Trump's magical mystery tour to the Middle East.
Yes.
Take it
Yeah.
away.
I have nothing good to say here. Look, I start from the premise that I was really wrong about Jared Kushner in the last administration. I think what the fact that they tore up the rule book, that they ignored all the peace processors, that they threw away the sort of the establishment wisdom about how to deal with the region, and just basically went to everybody and said, here's what we want. I think that that worked extraordinarily well. But I think Trump term one, Trump term two are really different. And part of that is that the president has um, a lot of self confidence, she said politely, a lot of self confidence, and a lot of confidence in the Qataris. And I got to say, I don't know whether folks have read the huge expose yesterday from the Free Press, 8,000 plus words. So I've written about this, but I don't
Well,
even
you
come
had
close.
a very good. It wasn't 8,000 words, but it was a very succinct piece about what's going on with Trump, not just Donald Trump, President Trump, but his son, Eric Trump, Steve Witkoff, the Middle East peace envoy, and his son, and a lot of the dealings that are going on in Qatar.
Right. And I think, look, this does not stand up to scrutiny. I get the Qataris have always played this game. They've just gotten much, much better at it. And in his second term, President Trump has been much more enthusiastic about breaking these norms, right? Where he said, we're not going to do business with countries. All right, well, they're funneling it through a Saudi, a Saudi shell company, but they are doing this major golf course. They're doing this cryptocurrency, and then there's the airplane. Do tell me, how do you feel about the 747, the palace in the sky?
Well, I'd like one for myself.
Yes,
However, listen, I mean, you were in government. What is there, a $200 cap
it's
on?
450 something
Okay.
dollars. Yeah.
Okay. $450 cap on a gift. First of all, remember the basketball and what was it, Finland with Putin? I mean, who knows? You know, and we thought that was bugged. We're gonna take a plane from the Qataris and not think that, it's state of the art, not think that there's, some kind of surveillance going on there. That's number one. Number two, even if President Trump wanted to take on the plane and use it as Air Force One, even if it was all inspected, let's just pretend for a minute. All inspected, all was great, all outfitted, the press corps could travel in style for once and not be complaining all the time if he would let them on the plane. But to say that he was going to find some, you know, cockamamie way to give it to the Air Force and then they could give it to his foundation for after he leaves office and then he'll have his own palace in the sky. I mean, that's even straining cruelty. So, the idea that he would think it's a good idea, say it's great, then say he would keep it after. I mean, the thing is, like, there's just, where is the line for him? There is no line. And that's back to something we've been talking about every week, which is like, everyone's letting him do whatever the hell he wants. I do think, though, that this week Republicans started to speak out on this issue.
I agree with you. So I want to ask you the question that my podcast co-host, Washington Post columnist Mark Thiessen asked in his piece about this today, which is, if this plane came from Australia, what would you think?
I'd also think I would think it's a little bit better. I mean, look, the French gave us the Statue of Liberty, but I would still have an issue. I would still have an issue with the idea that it's Air Force One and that the president is going to be using it. But the idea that it is coming from Qatar, and I want to get into the wider issue of the investments and all that and America being for sale in a minute. But it the Qatar thing itself is just really kind of cringy.
Yeah. Okay. So for me, this is about Qatar. Okay. We wouldn't take a plane like this from China. You can
There's no
strain.
difference between Qatar and China on this issue, in my point, in my
I,
opinion.
I think actually Qatar is responsible for the death of American citizens. What are you talking about? The Chinese, the Chinese haven't crossed that line in the last few decades, but the Qataris have. You can strain the law, and I think it is a strain to the law, and argue that it's okay to accept it. You can strain the law and suggest that other presidential libraries have been given Air Force One, the Air Force helicopter, Marine One, which they have. The Reagan Library has Air Force One after it was retired, and it was given to him by the Bush administration, but not for his personal use. It's a museum piece. The problem here is Qatar. The problem here is Qatar. And you know something, Elise? Their success at buying Washington is not just a Republican problem. Last year, I was talking to a friend who was in the Biden administration, and they said to me, "Oh, yeah, Qatar is one of President Biden's absolute favorite countries in the Middle East, really has confidence in them, loves to work with them." Now, set aside whether Joe Biden was there at all or not, the reality is Democrats and Republicans have given Qatar a pass. I think Qatar is basically a state sponsor of terrorism.
I want to read you something that I read on LinkedIn today. It was by Kevin Barron, who you might know used to be
Sure, I know
with
Kevin.
Defense One.
Yeah,
Um, he said that the gift is deserves all the scrutiny for the idea of security and political reasons, but he said that the hyping of it is incomplete and frankly outdated. Qatar is a crossroads from country for many countries' interests, from Gaza to Georgetown. Hosted the World Cup, sponsors Formula One, making huge efforts to change its image and relationship and improve way of life at the region. It's also the same Qatar that U.S. military and intelligence leaders from liberal and conservative administrations have relied on for counterterrorism and hostage operations.
I
You know,
would
they
never want to cast aspersions on a fellow human being, if they
I'm
weren't.
just saying they do have good PR in Washington, put it that way.
They they um they really have been everywhere, and they're very aggressive now in taking on people who disagree with them. So it's really, hey God, it's really a problematic thing. Let's talk
Let
about Iran quickly before we
well,
leave
no,
the region.
I want to talk about the wider idea and get back to what you were saying is I'm not, kind of opposed to shaking up this, sclerotic foreign policy establishment, but this, watching Trump kind of accept these, hundreds of millions of, close to a billion in total between Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE off to the highest bidder, is
That's
it
not
does
fair. That's
what
not fair, Elise.
okay.
That sort of icky commercial diplomacy is a thing, and it's always been a thing. The Democratic presidents go to the Gulf and they announce big Boeing
I'm
buys.
not. Let's not make this about a Democratic Republican thing. It's not a Democratic Republican thing. If President Biden or Obama or Carter or whatever did it, it'd be the same thing. When
Mm,
President Trump, and by the way, he let's talk about this Syria, for instance. I think it was a good idea personally that he lifted the sanctions on Syria.
do you?
However, okay. However, to say, oh, well, I did it for the crown prince, what I wouldn't do for the crown prince. He is saying that American policy is for sale. And don't you think under President Trump it isn't?
I don't know whether American foreign policy is for sale under President Trump. I know that there is what George H.W. Bush called an appearance of impropriety. And I would argue that on the other fronts that we talked about at the beginning, there's more than an appearance. It is improper for them to be building a golf course in Qatar. It is improper for them to be doing cryptocurrency deals with the Qataris. That is wrong and it should be illegal. Now, on the question of Syria, look, this could be brilliant.
Oh, and a couple of days
Ahmed
later,
Ahmed
Syria
Ashara,
asked
Ahmed
Trump,
Ashara, Ahmed
huh,
Ashara, who's the president, right? The former head of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, an Al Qaeda affiliate, right? He professes to be a changed man.
he wears a suit now.
Yeah, that's all I need. Um, the problem is that we don't know whether he's a changed man or not. And the idea that we suddenly lift sanctions without a significant period of testing, without a series of demands that are met by him, I think is very dangerous. So, this could end up being a Muslim Brotherhood state, an Islamist terrorist state supported by the United States. Or this could be brilliant. This could be the beginning of Syria becoming part of the broader Middle East. It could be a true capstone end to the Assad's years of terror. The problem is that we don't know, and of course, you rightly ascribe Donald Trump's motivations to something else. So,
Well, and
Tom, you
also
tell me.
apparently, I mean, if true, I'll continue while Danny hacks away, you poor thing. Um, Days later, it looks like he offered to build a Trump tower in Damascus when the time comes. Coincidence? I don't know, but just the idea, and again, doesn't have to be this isn't about, a Republican or Democratic thing. I think when a president goes and says, you know what, we've lectured you long enough, you're, you can basically, we're going to leave the politics to you. This is a grand new era of, we let each other do what we want, but you invest in the United States. What does that say? And okay, you know what? At what cost? When the president's sons are signing real estate deals in the same country where their father is conducting diplomacy with the jet, with the, sanctions are lifted, on the request from somebody, um, you know, I think that changes the game.
Yeah, but you're still ranting about Qatar. I feel like we've ranted that out. Why do you think Syria might have been a good idea?
I think if you lift sanctions and you give them a chance to get, people can't, American companies can't go in there. Most European countries companies can't go in there because they could be falling to secondary sanctions. If you lift it and you give them a chance, um, maybe they can make something of it. You can always reimpose the sanctions later on. So I
Well,
think giving them a chance, and I think this is something, I think it was the right thing to do to say, let's see if they can make something of it. If he turns out to be, a terrorist in a suit again, you can reimpose the sanctions. Should we talk about Iran?
yeah, let's talk about Iran, and I'm gonna try and keep my voice on a low keel because it makes me cough when I talk, I can see.
I can't do
So
that. They don't call me Elise Blabett for nothing. So
I had never heard that.
in school, I mean, just between you, me, and the hundreds of people that we have online right now.
Yeah, and all of the thousands who then listen to it afterwards. Yes, Elise Blabett, here she is, folks. So, Iran. So, I think we don't have a good sense of what's going on. I know that the president is hyper confident about the prospect of a deal with the Iranians. He has said that they cannot enrich. The Iranians are saying, well, we could agree to enrich only to the limit allowed by the International Atomic Energy Agency. That's crap. The ability is the ability is the ability. Either they're enriching or they're not enriching. And any expert on this will tell you that the fact that we were lied to by the Obama administration and there was a pretense that we could have anywhere, anytime inspections that would stop them from enriching at a higher level is just garbage. The answer is they cannot enrich. No, period. End of story. And the president has said that, but he's also said other stuff. The problem for me is exactly the one you and I have discussed every single week. It is that Steve Witkoff doesn't know what he's doing. that Michael Anton, who is the lead at the State Department, also has no background in this space. I don't care. Put a political person in there. Put somebody who the president
Put
trusts, but
someone who
bring
know,
along.
but someone who knows. Bring along nuclear experts. I mean,
Right. This is what, I would like them to have folks from the IAEA. I would like to have them to have folks. And they did have a bunch of non-pro people in the first Trump administration. I'm very nervous about this. I know that the Israelis are very nervous about this. And we're just going to have to watch this space. The problem is, I think that the president could get taken for a ride by the Iranians. They're very good at what they do. And I think they found a mark in Steve Witkoff. So we'll see what happens. I want to talk about Turkey and Ukraine, Russia before we get away from foreign policy stuff too.
go for it.
So I really haven't got a single damn good thing to say about the Trump administration this week, and I usually do on immigration and other stuff. I'm pretty enthusiastic about them. Anti-Semitism, the same thing. I'm pretty enthusiastic about them. On this Ukraine stuff, I'm really glad that Donald Trump has finally figured out that the Russians are playing for time, that all they want to do is keep taking pieces of Ukraine and negotiate from a better position. But he is the one who said that he wanted the deal to happen in Turkey this Thursday. He is the one who told the Ukrainians they better show up. This was Putin's idea. Putin said, we need to meet directly. And then Putin not only doesn't show up, but sends a super low level delegation,
An
not a foreign
offensive,
minister.
knowing that Zelensky was planning to go,
Right.
a really
And
offensive
what does
delegation.
Donald Trump say? But well, of course he wasn't going to show up because I wasn't going to be there. Dude, sorry. You are the center of the universe and the greatest of all time, but still, the fact is that you said that this needed to happen, and then Putin welched. Putin hasn't met a single one of Donald Trump's demands, not a single one. And it's time for him to recognize that the reason he hasn't is because he wants to occupy and take up and swallow all of Ukraine.
Do you
Period. End of story.
which do you think is more likely to happen? Does President Trump call him at it and get tough, or does he not want to admit that he got played and just kind of loses interest?
I think the latter is where I think things are headed. And I don't care if he loses interest as long as we continue to support Ukraine. If we continue to support Ukraine, if we put additional sanctions on the Russians, if we do what Donald Trump said he was going to do, which is that if Vladimir Putin didn't come to the table, that he
He would put
would
more sanctions
put
on.
more sanctions on Russia. He would give the Ukrainians stuff that they were asking for and have been for the last 3 years. So, is he going to do it? I have serious doubts as to whether he's going to do it because I think he's just lost interest. And this is
Not only,
it's like North Korea,
if
whatever.
if he was willing to put more sanctions on, this would be a good opportunity for him to work with the Europeans, kind of repair some of the damage, the strain that has happened over the last few months, and say, let's work together with coordinated sanctions. And, listen, Russia is already sanctions up the wazoo. Um,
But not on the oil front. They're
not on the oil.
selling
No, I was
oil.
just going to say that if they decide, if the Europeans are willing to, take suck up some of those and eat some of those sanctions and really squeeze Putin by the, as Madeline Albright would say, by the cojones, that would be
Ew.
th- that would be that would be killing two birds with one stone. It would be the U.S. kind of working again with the Europeans, and it would, it would make Putin feel the heat, knowing that he'd have to, make some concessions and also help Ukraine.
Yeah. Yes to all of that. That would be good.
That's
All
my
of that would
favorite
be
thing
excellent.
when Danny
So,
says yes.
yes, thank you. Mwah. So, Lindsey Graham, who goes back and forth as one of my favorite senators, Lindsey Graham has a terrific Russia sanctions bill. Ruthless, brutal, no loopholes. It is, sorry, guys. It's got more than 70 co sponsors in the Senate. That's fantastic. That's a super majority. Problem is the House. House lead is a great member of Congress, moderate Republican named Mark Fitzpatrick, who I like a lot, but I think I just got his first name wrong. Sorry, dude. But that's not going to get it past the House. And so What I'm looking at is the possibility that Donald Trump doesn't do something about Russia sanctions, the House of Representatives and the Senate does something. It would be nice as these members of Congress are all waking up. No, don't take the plane from Qatar. No, don't do that. No, don't do that. That they also decided to retake control of Russia policy, as they did in the first Trump term to huge effect, right? Congressmen, senators were great on this. Bipartisan, they made Trump do it. He imposed really great sanctions on Russia in 2018 and 2019, and it would be great to see them tighten the screws because Putin needs to understand this cannot continue.
Um, is Johnson gonna, Mike Johnson kind of goes whichever way the wind blows. So,
I
if
don't think
Trump
that's
were to,
fair to Mike Johnson.
okay.
I like him a lot. I think he's very solid on Ukraine. I think he's a very good speaker. He has an unbelievably awful caucus, and so did Nancy Pelosi. Look,
She does.
when you have a razor thin, and I mean I remember the stories about Pelosi standing and railing against the squad and how much she couldn't stand them and couldn't stand working with them. Johnson has exactly the same problem. And in this modern age, we now have these extraordinarily closely divided
Well, the difference
houses of
between
representatives.
the difference is that, these people, um, that they say they support the president, but they're not really willing to help carry out his agenda.
Well, again, they're willing to help carry out his agenda, but they don't want to tangle with him when he opposes them. And this is the difficulty. And, look, we have an entire ecosphere that's very, very meaningful out there, whether it's podcasters or it's alt media. And it's, the crazy town Marjorie Taylor Greene and her Jewish space lasers. And real people have to deal with that. They have to deal with it in elections. They have to deal with it in being primaried. And just like the Democrats are now trying to offload their number two, David Hogg, for actually wanting to spend his super PAC money challenging incumbent Democrats, the Republicans have serious problems on this front as well, which is
Oh,
that
come on. I
people are
mean, look
always
at all the
looking for their
people that
backs.
if they don't support the president's agenda, they're going to, or anything, if they say anything negative, if they even go along and support areas where the president wants to cooperate with Democrats, then they want to primary them. Why the hell are people working against their own agenda? I just don't understand.
Well, this is the problem in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. This is the problem in Washington, and it's as a bigger problem on both. It's
Yeah,
huge on
it's
both sides
gross.
of the aisle, right? You cannot get Democrats to side with Republicans. You cannot get Republicans to side with Democrats. It didn't used to be this way. Yeah, it was always a little bit this way, but it didn't used to be this way, where people are genuinely afraid to work with to put their hand across the aisle, and that goes for Democrats and Republicans. Hey, I want to ask you something that we didn't put on our list. What else was on our list before I get to that extra?
I think we're listed out. So it's
Amazing.
yep. What was what's on your
So
mind?
what's on my mind is the question of these two books, and I want to talk more about them next week. These two books that have come out about the cover up of Joe
Oh yeah.
Biden's senility, right? So one of them is Jake Tapper,
Jake Tapper, yeah.
and it's Alex, what's his
Thompson
name?
from
Thompson,
Axios.
who was who you could never accuse of covering anything up. He was great on this. Jake less so. And then there's another book out on a similar front. Jake's book is coming out next week. I'm reading these interesting back and forths. Nate Silver had a piece today in which he asked, was the media complicit in covering up Biden's incapacity to govern? And Jonah Goldberg had a piece, my colleague who I
My
love, Jonah
favorite.
Goldberg,
I have a girl crush
on Jonah.
on Jonah. Yeah,
I'll tell him.
I love Jonah.
Um,
Love me some Jonah Goldberg.
he's fantastic, and he also has the unusual trait in Washington, which is that he has a great sense of humor. But he was much less hard on the media for covering up Joe Biden's senility than Nate Silver was, who just
Interesting.
said, and I found that very interesting. Do you think the media was tough enough on Biden?
I don't. I got to be honest. I don't think the media is ever tough enough on the president that's in office. Okay. So I don't think they were tough enough on Biden, but they did, like, you know what I mean? There were days, like, if he would stumble, there would be a couple of days of replaying that stumble. If there were, you know what I mean? And I think, you know, I don't want to say writ large, I'd say there were episodic periods where they were um they were able to, use the news peg to, I on the whole, no. But I gotta say, I know you're gonna feel differently, but I think when
Yes.
President Trump, some of the things he says and his, stream of consciousness, I don't think they go on about that either. They'll talk about that he's speaking, but they won't say anything about any kind of, mental acuity. And I think it's
You strain credulity. The
I
media
I don't I disagree. I
is
disagree.
on Donald Trump
No,
like a rash. But
no, let
let's
me
go back to
finish the
Biden.
point. Let me finish the point.
All
I'm
right.
not saying they don't criticize. I don't think they're hard enough on this issue on on any president in office. It's really hard for the media. I don't think it's hard for me because I'm not, right now attached to some kind of network where I have an editor and I have a but they look at what happens now. You get sued, you lose your access. I'm not saying
Mm.
that's the end of the world, but I don't think they've been tough enough on either case. I mean, when you had that debate, it was impossible to ignore.
Yeah, but I mean, everybody knew that before the debate.
Okay, Danny,
And
but
then
you
he
watch
went
a
on and
Saturday night
governed for another 7 months.
you I don't disagree, but you watch a Saturday Night Live skit about Trump and blah blah blah. It's not too far from the truth, okay?
Again, I think that Donald Trump has many, many weaknesses. I don't think he's senile.
I don't think
I
he's senile, but he's a little, you think he's speaking and thinking clearly?
I think he's speaking and thinking as clearly as he ever has. So that's
Maybe
a
it's just a
problem.
level of intellectualism that we're expecting from our president that we don't have.
No, I don't think that's right. Look, at the end of the day, Donald Trump is a digressor, and sometimes you ask yourself what the hell he's talking about. It's true, and he is
Okay, so
78.
what is that? What is that?
That's not senile. Sorry. And I mean, I'm not. I don't want to
I didn't
pretend
say
to
he
be
was I never used the word
right.
senile.
Right, but that's what we were talking about in the case of somebody who was governing probably for 2 full years, where he was actually, sort of
Oh, I
puttable
don't
in a home.
disagree. I
So,
don't
but
disagree.
what kind of accountability should there be for this, do you think?
Excuse me, what kind of accountability was there for the Iraq war, for, not kind of, you know, on the Iraq war?
What do you mean?
On all
We
the
fought the Iraq War, we won the Iraq War, and then Barack Obama withdrew from Iraq.
Okay,
And
but
then
what
there was
about all the
ISIS. So
weapons
what
of mass?
accountability are you
The
looking
re-
for here,
the reason we
Elise?
went to the reason we went to war was not because he was like such a bad guy. There were weapons of mass destruction. Where were they?
First of all, he was a bad guy.
I
Second of
didn't say he
all,
wasn't a bad guy, but that wasn't why we went to war.
I have a great documentary series coming out on this. I will share it with you, and then you
Please
can
do.
learn about why it was that we went to war in Iraq. Um, it's only taken us 2 years, AEI, but it should be coming out soon, and that's pretty interesting. So yeah, we disagree about this one.
But the
But
answer is
accountability, but
were
Elise, accountability for going to war. You can say yes, you can say no, you can agree, you can disagree. And having a president who is not mentally competent to hold the nuclear football are two very different
can I
things.
tell you what really bothers me about these books coming out?
Mm.
Is that the sources and that these books are being written. I mean, I haven't read them yet, but any of the excerpts that are coming out, all by anonymous sources.
So I gather that the second book, and I can't remember who wrote it, is much more anonymous sources, and that Jake's actually is much more. At Jake and Alex have many more people on the record. But look, I mean, that's Washington, you know. You can have anonymous sources, or you can have Bob Woodward, who puts words in people's mouths that they didn't utter.
True.
At the end of the day, this is going to be a huge bestseller. But I got to say, when I see states starting to put an age limit on their elected
Oh,
officials, I think that's right. I hate
I
to
think
say
it's
it.
right too.
I think there are people.
I think there should be certain requirements other than age. I think that there should be certain requirements that you need a certain amount of knowledge about the US law and the US Constitution. I'm not saying you need a law degree, but there be a mental fitness test. Let me ask you.
Well, again, you know, mental fitness tests. You remember the reports from Biden's doctors. Mental fitness tests are in the eyes of the beholder and can be massaged. I think the bottom line is, while there are tons and tons of people, there are people who are 90 and amazing, totally on their game, totally compos mentis.
We
You
had
know,
Kissinger at his like 100th birthday, like a few weeks before his death. He was a
and
little frail,
he was frail, he
as
was
sharp as a
slow,
tack.
but he was as sharp as he ever was, and he didn't, and he knew who George Clooney was. I think that's the answer. I think it probably would require a constitutional amendment, but you and I are going over. Thank God you and I are so young that
We are, thank God.
we can just say all of these things. All right,
I want
show
to
your new
thank
swag
Eric. I want to thank Eric Weisbrau for my Cosmopolitics shaker. It'll be full of something yummy next week.
next week.
Danny,
Next
good to
week
have
I'm
you
back.
back. And have a good week, everybody. Don't forget to send us, what do you want to hear about? Things from the week that you want us to talk about. And put your comments in the chat below and look forward to seeing you next week.
And sorry for the time change. We'll be back at our usual bat time, bat station, bat channel, bat all of it. Old bats.
Young bats.
Next week. Take care, everyone.
Bye.